Oh shit. Well, since it's almost Halloween, that obviously means I have to review something spooky. That's like YouTube law. And I thought, hey, since Higurashi's got a new season out, I should totally do a review of something in that franchise's canon. So let's look at the bastard stepson forgotten and lost to the sands of the Japanese market, because milking a franchise means barely related side stories just can't compete. Or perhaps it has something to do with people more interested in kids brutally murdering each other with vaguely supernatural themes, rather than a whodunit where an actual witch steps out and says it was her. So if you wanted Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, you're gonna be sorely disappointed, because we're looking at its mostly forgotten offspring, Umineko no Naku Koro ni, or Umineko when they cry. Or because fuck you localizers for failing to translate an easily translatable title, When the Seagulls Cry. Yeah, spoilers ahead for an over 10-year-old show. To follow up on the success of their widely popular horror visual novel, Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, 7th expansion developed a new murder mystery story that played more into the detective tradition already set up. And goddamn was somebody playing Phoenix Wright when working on this. So when 2006 Comiket came to a close and the Higurashi story was wrapped up with what would later become the first 2 series of the anime, the group set their sights on creating something different while capitalizing on the fanbase they had built up. Enter Umineko, which flew off the shelves, selling out in 30 minutes on its initial release. Studio Dean, hot off the heels of finishing Season 2 of Higurashi, swiftly started work on an anime adaptation of Umineko in 2009, which was probably a poor decision in hindsight since the visual novel for it weren't even done until 2010. But no, that didn't stop the studio. Stepping back into the director's seat was Kon Chiaki, a female director, which is pretty damn rare in the industry. She's practically synonymous with the When They Cry brand at this point, directing the first 2 seasons of Higurashi, the OVAs, and now Umineko too, as well as a ton of other series from Bleach, Sailor Moon, Junjo Romantica, and Arcana Familia. Not to mention a ton of scriptwriting and storyboarding experience on top of that. Series composer Kawase Toshifumi shows his diverse talent here too, being a seasoned director, storyboarder, and scriptwriter in his own right, tackling Tsubasa Chronicle, Giant Killing, and oh, and look at that, nepotism. Did they just roll over the entire staff from Higurashi? I'm not mad, I just want to know. Either way, I think having a staff with a wide portfolio working at high levels in different positions leads to a better understanding of how to tackle production. So a director who's worked with scripts and storyboards and a writer who's directed before can do their jobs better knowing how to direct a workflow or cater to a different department. And hey, speaking of, animation director is a big contributor too. And here we have someone who didn't work on Higurashi finally, allowing this series to somewhat peek from behind its massive shadow with Ban Yukiko. They worked on Gintama, Rental Magica. Oh, and look, a different flavor of nepotism. Well, that's not fair. I'm sure they got the job because the director knew they'd fit well. I usually like to go into detail a bit about the main cast too, since they're the ones bringing the series to life, but there's a ton of main cast. Focusing on the main of the main would be Ohara Sayaka as Beatrice and Ono Daisuke as Battler. Sayaka's main roles people would recognize are Erza Scarlet from Fairy Tail and Irisville from the Fate franchise. Oh yeah, she does the hot mom voice pretty well. She's got plenty of big roles under her belt with plenty of characters she's played from supporting to main cast, and just years of history. Daisuke's got about as big of a repertoire as well, voicing anime Clint Eastwood himself, Jotaro from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Itsuki from Haruhi, Erwin from Attack on Titan, and Shizuo from Durarara. Not to mention Horie Yui as Maria, Satorina as Anjay, Kobayashi Yu as Kanon, Inoue Marina as Jessica, and Kugi Miyarie as Shannon. Yes, those are all main characters. I'd say the opening is one of the more memorable things about this series. Composed by Shikata Akiko, it captures the grand scale of the series we're about to watch. Primarily a detective story with almost courtroom scene breakaways, there's an almost cat and mouse vibe to this series that it conveys. On a larger scale though, with a sweeping symphony sound and a chorus bellowing the melody. It really sets the tone for the series you're about to watch. Something like a play or a Greek tragedy, while conveying the bleakness of the situation before delivering some hope to the audience to tell them what they're watching isn't meaningless. From that, the main vocals introduce the themes the series will play with, without delivering flat-out exposition. and I tend to enjoy OPs more along that line as it feels less like an anime song and more like a song being used by an anime. But that's my personal preference. And yeah, this song goes with pretty much everything, so have fun. So let's get right into what the fuck is Umineko no Naku Koro ni. Set in 1986, it follows the cursed Ushiromiya family, a wealthy group whose head is close to death. They're all called to his island mansion for a standard family get-together, and soon the parents of the various younger members are all found dead. Some blame it on the curse of the Golden Witch, Beatrice, whom legend says the family owes their wealth to. The main protagonist, Battler, besides being a perv, is also really into detective shit, and decides that a witch's curse isn't solid evidence or logical. Therefore, he'll solve the murder, since the parents dying gruesomely and arranged in a horrific manner tells us that there's a murderer loose on the island. So he does his best to find out who it is before everyone dies, and the murderer gets away with the family's wealth. Unfortunately, he fails at it, and everyone's killed off. And I do mean everyone. The entire family's wiped out. That'd be the end of the show, right? Everyone's dead, bad ending? Waste of time. Well, wrong. That's like episode 5 out of 26. And for those who started with Higurashi and know about the cycles, you'll catch on quick that everyone dying doesn't mean much in this series. Battler and his cousins are talking about how the witch is totally real and definitely killed everyone, but Battler, even in death, still doesn't buy it. So that's when the witch herself shows up and demands Battler believe in her, because she killed him. He points out how all of the murders could logically be explained, and that begins their game. If Battler accepts that Beatrice is real, he and his family die, and that's that. But if he doesn't, they go again? He doesn't really have a win condition. I guess maybe getting a run where no one believes in her and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that there wasn't a witch. Maybe then she disappears. From there, it's pretty much rinse and repeat, with more information about the cast, their histories, and how they connect outside of just being family. Oh, and a genuine mystery about the Ushiromiya family's life unfolds through the retelling of events leading up to their deaths. Things do go off the rails sometimes, but ultimately, it sticks to the framing device of a witch's game to flesh out the characters, setting, and their circumstances. And that's what's more engaging than the actual murders. So how effective is this at not just a horror anime, but a sister series to Higurashi, arguably one of the best horror anime out there? And if you're wondering how this connects to Higurashi, well, besides Mario watching it on TV, because it does connect in a more meaningful way, another witch by the name of Frederica Berncastle shows up, and who's the spitting image of Rika from Higurashi, and has the power to allow people infinite chances to redo something as long as the possibility isn't zero. Sound familiar to any fans? Because that's exactly what the time loop was in that series, and it carries over to this one through this character. Because the extended Higurashi verse wasn't confusing enough. Enter a whole slew of information that's probably going to confuse even hardcore fans of the anime, and probably the visual novel too. Though, honestly, it doesn't really matter in the end. The magic element introduced is more just an excuse to abuse using the characters and setting over and over again, with a little variety. And on top of that, how it links to Higurashi isn't important, as you can watch this as a standalone and be perfectly fine, if not a little confused. But watching Higurashi isn't gonna fix that, so don't worry. For horror, it mostly accomplishes its goal of being disturbing without outright instilling a sense of dread. Sure, there's hopelessness, because the situations seem like lost causes, but that's followed by turnarounds with revelations. But that's not scary. Strip out the extraneous elements and you're left with a pretty bog-standard detective plotline with slightly interesting characters. Oh, and a ton of gore. It can build suspense and make you wince at the brutality, but that's not going to keep anyone awake with how spooky it is. And that's kind of a shame, as it does have potential for that, even if that's not the intended goal of the creators. I can tell that this was meant to be more a piece that told a story about solving problems, like the chess metaphor it's so fond of, rather than trying to be unsettling. But even that doesn't mean it's not horror. There's still elements in this series that are there to be disturbing, like the murders, tension built up concerning the unfolding chaos, and constant infighting among the family members breeding contempt. But it lacks that sort of underlying mystery to carry viewers through, like so many other horror stories have. You know, am I trying to figure out who the murderer is? Well, no, because pretty much everyone dies throughout the course of the series. I guess, Is the witch real? Well, yeah. It's pretty clear witches exist in this world, and that's why this is mostly just okay. For animation, this series carries a similar style to its parent. You know, being made by the same studio only a year after it wrapped with most of the same staff returning. For 2009, it looks pretty nice, with interesting camera moves, solid cinematography, framing, and an impressive use of those to build tension in its scenes, getting the audience ready for whatever revelation or shock this series has in store. Though admittedly, by our modern standards, the colors are flat, the movements are stiff, and the compositing isn't great, but I don't really fault it for that, since that's a limitation and product of the era this was made in, rather than a problem with the show. Though I will fault it for the dark, muddy color palette that doesn't quite help much, as that does cause the issue of trying to take away from the more dark tone the series is trying to have. While thematically, on the surface, that does make sense. It's a dark story, you want a darker color palette? There's the drawback of it not disrupting the status quo. Essentially, since the sky is gray from the midpoint of episode 1 on, and there's not much visual liveliness to draw a stark contrast when they find the dead people and the tone of the series shifts, the stakes don't feel raised, which comes across as them trying to do what they did before. But summer in rural Japan is different than fall during a typhoon. One allows for visual variety, and the other is stuck in a dark mansion the entire time. My first watch of this anime was around 2010, after it finished airing, and I hadn't seen it since besides the rewatch to do this video. I remembered the general plot, the main murders early on, and how weird this one got, but not much else. The rest was a vague blur, and why is, I think this one has an issue of being connected to such an influential series. The studio that grabbed it was looking to continue their success from Higurashi when it ended, and hoped Umineko would do that. You can kinda tell, because this one only covers the first 4 arcs of an 8-arc story. With a heavier emphasis on gore and the game than its predecessor, it almost feels like a cheap imitation. After this wrapped, Umineko, the visual novel franchise, ended in December 2010. That was a year after this finished airing, which would have been a great starting point in 2011 to finish this if they felt so inclined, but the second half never saw the light of day. That's pretty telling, not just about the studio, but the reception of the anime. If you're looking for something to spook up your week, there's better anime than this, but if you want a slasher-style detective story that delves deep into magic and such, this might just be what you're looking for. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description. And if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks, like voting on what I do next. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Volcarona for their continued support. Thanks for watching.